my title today is God's Beloved. And who is God's beloved? It's us. It's all of us, you know, and what we need to do on a conscious level is to love, honor, and respect ourselves. I thought to myself, we are Spirit's heirs, Heirs, you know, the heir to everything that's bestowed on us. And love is really the core of our well-being. And think about this now. How can you go through life peacefully if you don't care about yourself, if you don't honor yourself and respect yourself? And I really loved your reading today, because most of us would be shocked at how we speak to ourselves. I read years and years ago, I read this. Somebody wrote, they said, most people would never speak to somebody else the way they speak to themselves. Think about that. I mean, you know, would you, the things you say to yourself, when Becky and I were in Auburn, California, I was doing a class one night, and we were talking about respecting yourself. And as I was in the middle of talking, I dropped my pencil. And as I leaned down to get my pencil, I said, what a klutz. And when I came back up, my board president, who was a friend, was sitting opposite me. And she said, did you hear what you just did? And I didn't. It was so much a part of me that I didn't even realize I did it until she called me on it. And she said, you're teaching a class on honoring yourself, and you just called yourself a klutz. I mean, you know, and I would never call somebody kidding, maybe, but, you know, in terms of what we say to ourselves. You know, the Buddha once said, you can search the universe for someone who is more deserving of your love and affection than you yourself are, and that person is not to be found anywhere. You know what? All of us, what we teach and what we believe is that our inner self is already perfect. So it doesn't really matter what's going on outside. We're all humanity. So I thought about this a lot because Becky and I watch the news a lot. And it's really the news lately, you know, it's somebody being burned alive and all of this stuff that's happening. It's such a downer. And I thought to myself how humanity, think about how creative we are in the arts, in music, in science, in math, in all kinds of technology. And we all have these gifts. It's not just a few people, it's everybody. You know, in the Bible, in Luke, it says, fear not, it is the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And, you know, so what's that saying? It's saying, you know, if we reach out, that we're going to be guided, and that there's somebody, a loving presence that's always with us. And so who, if they didn't love us, would make that kind of a commitment? That, you know, we're all precious to God. And so if we're all precious to Spirit, how could we not be precious to ourselves? And I was thinking this week of the story of the prodigal son, who in effect says to his dad, I can't wait for you to die. Can you please give me my inheritance? And then goes off. You know the story, but when he comes back and the father sees him in the field, he goes running to him. And when the son says to him, I am not worthy, he doesn't say, yes, you are. He just totally ignores it, like he doesn't hear it, and he just grabs him and hugs him. That's the kind of love that Spirit has for us, and I think we're supposed to have for ourselves too. So I love Alan Cohen's writing, and I was reading a part of his book, Dare to Love Yourself, which we did in Ginny's group a couple of years ago. And he describes in there, he was going out with a friend to eat one day, and there was valet parking. And his friend gave the guy $5 for parking his car, okay? And then they go into the restaurant. And the fellow, must have been breakfast, because the fellow was looking at the menu, and he couldn't decide if he should order a side of bacon. And so he said to the waitress or whatever, how much is it? And they said, $5. And he said, no, I'm not going to spend it. And Alan Cohen said, go ahead. And he said, no, I'm not going to spend the $5. And then the fellow had an aha. He said, wait a minute. What does this say about how I feel about myself? I was willing to give $5 to the valet to park my car to make him happy, but I won't spend $5 on myself for a side order of bacon that I really want. What does that say about how I love me? And Cohen goes on to say, if we hear the phrase "love thy neighbor," and you can take it two ways. Obviously, to love your neighbor, but you can also turn it to say, I need to love myself as much as I love my neighbor. To give myself that same caring and kindness and respect. And if you want to find love, you've got to love yourself first, because this was one of the lessons that this lady spoke to us about yesterday, how the difficult life she had, and how at one point in her life she weighed 105 pounds, which isn't a lot, and her mother used to tell her, you're ugly and you're fat. And she had such a long way to go to find this self-love that she can now give out to other people. So now I know this is going to sound a little funny, but when you get behind it, there's some seriousness to it. There's a fellow named Jerry Waters who asked the question, would you marry yourself? Would you marry yourself? Do you believe that you're beautiful? Do you like spending time by yourself? And if you don't appreciate yourself, how is anybody else going to appreciate you? How can you expect somebody else to care about you if you show them that you don't care about yourself? So you all know who Louise Haye is. She's a head of Hay House, and she's also a religious science minister. And I didn't remember this. I was reading one of her books this week, and I didn't remember this is how she felt. But she said, whenever anybody comes to her for counseling with any issue, the only issue she works with is self-love. She said, anytime somebody comes to her about anything, self-love is what they really need to work on. So that's the only thing she counsels people on. And she said, love works miracles in our life, and we need to have great respect for ourselves, for who we are, and for our bodies. And she said, the interesting thing is, babies have it. Babies love themselves on some level. She said, they demand love, and they demand your attention. And when they want something, they're going to tell you what they want, whether it's food or, change me or whatever it is. She said, they're full of love. But somehow, as we grow older and we hear different criticisms and judgments, etc., we start to doubt our own magnificence. So Louise Haye is a big believer in working in front of mirrors. And I'm just going to tell you one of her exercises. She said, look in the mirror, stay, by yourself, look in the mirror and say to yourself, I deserve to have, or I deserve to be. You could fill in the blank. I deserve to have, or I deserve to be. And she said, say that over and over a few times, and then stop and ask yourself, how do I feel? And she said, if at the end of doing it, if you don't feel worthy, say to yourself, I release the pattern in my consciousness that is creating resistance to my good. I release the pattern in my consciousness that is creating resistance to my good. And she said, you keep doing that over and over again, and eventually you'll start to feel it and start to feel worthy. One of the early New Thought writers was Joel Goldsmith, and he says, if you found yourself in the presence of Spirit, of God, you wouldn't be able to find anything that's not of a harmonious nature. Everything in that presence would be of a harmonious nature. And he said that's what's meant in the Bible, where it says, I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. That Spirit wants us to have life and have it more and more abundantly. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. But Ernest Holmes wrote, he said that we can consciously deprive ourselves of God's love. And later on in that same paragraph, he said, I use the word deprive to make a point. He said, because God's love is always there. It's always pouring down. And we get to make the decision to recognize it or to ignore it. So that's why he's saying we can deprive ourselves. We can make that decision, that choice. So I want to talk a little bit about a rabbi named Shaunie Labowitz, who is actually, I love her book, and I decided I'm going to meet her. She's in Florida. And she said that you're holy regardless of what you say, what you do, or what you think. She said you're surrounded by holiness in the form of angels. Some you see and some you don't see. And I thought, yeah, the ones we see are each other. That's what she's trying to tell us. And she said, most people recognize holiness in milestone events. She said you recognize holiness, for instance, in a birth. You recognize holiness in a blossoming flower. You recognize holiness in a sunset. But she said holiness exists every moment. Every moment is a miracle unfolding. And every one of us is holiness in action. And we encounter God every second in everything we do. So, if you really can bring that to the forehead, you really would, I suppose, really start to realize, hey, I really am special. And that we're all really, really special. We had a big conversation about this week, Beck and I, when we were doing this, and how special we are. So I read something by a yogi, Amirit Desai, who wrote, each day affirm that there is nothing in this world that can stop you from transforming your life, opening your heart, loving yourself, and sharing your love with everyone you encounter. So Ernest Holmes also said that if you're unhappy in your life, there are 4 adjustments that you need to make. And the first one, he said, is your mental and emotional approach to life. Ask yourself things like, who am I? What am I? Do I make sense? Am I worthwhile? Am I somebody in my own right? And then the second, third, and fourth things that he talked about were the people around me, society, and life itself. But he said it all begins with loving, honoring, and accepting yourself. So let me give you a couple of examples that I read about this week. One of them was there's a group of Indians in Mexico, and part of their spiritual belief is that there's a flower in each one of us, inside each one of us, that's waiting to blossom. And it needs our love and care and our tenderness, and that our purpose here is to find out how to make it grow and then to do it. And the other thing I read about a woman who, because of something that happened when she was born, she's legally blind. And the person that was writing about her said she's so pretty that she actually has done modeling. But there were times when she would get very angry and hostile at her condition. And the fellow who wrote the article, his name is Jerry Jampolsky, and he's an MD, and he and his wife do a lot of forgiveness work, and they both are students of the Course in Miracles. And so somehow Jampolsky and this woman hooked up, and he started to help her get a more positive mental picture of herself. And she used to see herself as being handicapped, for instance, and he got her to start thinking of herself as normal and doing these exercises. And she went from being legally blind to being able to see in the daytime. And she kept doing the work. And she called him up one day and she said, how'd you like to go for a drive? She cured herself of the blindness by loving herself and actually got a driver's license. And he said, it was the happiest drive I ever took, even though I cried the entire time. So here was a woman who who learned to love herself and actually healed herself from being blind. So I said I was going to come back to this. You know, most of you have seen Edwene Gaines or know who she is. She's a teacher, a Unity minister who goes around teaching about abundance. And in her book, she said, if you want something and you deny yourself, you're spiritually lazy. You're spiritually lazy if you don't do the work to get it. She said, God wants you to do more, and God wants you to have more, so play big. Play big. She said, whatever desires we have, that Spirit put them there, so celebrate them. She said, life is about appreciating everything that it has to offer, and by doing that is how we glorify Spirit and how we honor Spirit. So when Beck and I were having whatever it was, lunch or dinner with this lady, whatever 3 o'clock in the afternoon is, I shared what I'm going to talk about next because it really blew me away. I want to talk about something that by Rabbi Owen Kula, and he talks about loving yourself, but what I was amazed about it, he is a rabbi, but he talked about it from the Christian perspective and by quoting Jesus, and it kind of blew me away how he did it. So he started out the chapter by talking about Thomas Merton and saying how Merton, who also is a Christian, that all beings have within them this hidden wholeness, and he said there's this font of inexhaustible sweetness and purity that are within everybody. And he said, you know, it can't be tarnished or diminished by fear or fractured in any way. It just can't be broken. And then Kula starts talking about it, and he made me think of this part of the Bible in a different way. And it just, like I said, it struck me to have a rabbi writing about the New Testament. And so he said, Jesus said, you are the light of the world. And think about that now. You are the light of the world. But here's the part that grabbed me. He said, Jesus was speaking to ordinary people, the people of his day, ordinary people, the general public, okay? He said, these people were in church goers. He said most of them were uneducated. Probably none of them had a spiritual practice. None of them would have had any theological training. And Jesus says to them, simply because you're alive on this earth, you are the light of the world. Think about that, you know? Because he's saying it to us too, but, you know, I was almost going to put it here. In fact, I did, and I crossed it out, that he's talking to people like you and me. And then I thought, geez, if I start calling them uneducated, they might get mad at me. But in his day, they were. Most of them were. And he's still saying to them, you're the light of the world. And he goes on there to say, let go of judgment. Be more merciful on yourself. And Kula then says, you know, some people judge themselves as being broken or defective or unworthy or a failure or whatever. And he said, but when Jesus said, you are the light of the world, there was no fine print and no exclusions. He didn't say you're the light of the world if you go to church every Sunday, or you're the light of the world if you found the cure for cancer or the cure for global warming, or you're the light of the world if you've never sinned, or you solved world hunger. What he said was, you are the light of the world just because you were born. And you, meaning all of us, carry the spark of divine love, of divine fire. And then at the end of the chapter, he asked some questions. He said, so what if you believed all of this? And what if for one day you acted as if you believed it in everything you did? How would you think that day? How would you act that day? What would you choose to do that day? And then he said, how would you respond differently to the world doing such a day? Imagine if everybody in the world went around and everybody spent the day, said, today's the day, Valentine's Day, we're going to love ourselves. If everybody did that, what a different world it would be. So I want to close but with a quote from the other rabbi, Shaunie Labowitz, who wrote something I really love. She said, holiness cannot be seen, yet it sees all. It cannot be touched, yet touches all. It cannot be heard, yet its melody sings throughout all creation. It is both in the world and of the world. Holiness is being in union with God and encountering spiritual union in all dimensions of life. So thank you for being here. God bless you. And I hope you all come to brunch with us today too.